So with the phycotoxins, if a human ingests the phycotoxin, this can just be very poisonous to them, and it can cause what's called paralytic shellfish poisoning, which can be very, very harmful. Um, the phycotoxins can be produced by organisms that are known as red tides. So you may have seen these at somewhere if you travel quite often, especially to aquatic environments. And these red tides can be not only dangerous to humans, but they can be dangerous to fish, because what happens is the red tides deplete the oxygen from the water, and that causes a lot of aquatic organisms to die, such as fish. Okay? So those are kind of the two problematic issues that we have with some algae, some genres of algae. Okay, now let's kind of discuss the protozoan groups. These organisms do not maintain photosynthetic properties. So protozoans are non-photosynthetic. They are still eukaryotic organisms, because everything in this chapter we're studying is eukaryotic organisms. And some are going to be mostly unicellular. And by unicellular, we just mean that one cell is equal to one organism. And they're also free-living, which means that they don't necessarily reside as parasites or reside in living on another host organism. You can find protozoans pretty much everywhere. You can find them in soil, you can find them in water, you can find them really pretty much anywhere out in the environment. And protozoans tend to be more animal-like than they do plant-like, which means they can have interactive behavior among each other. You'll see predation among organisms in this group. We don't see that too much in plant-like organisms, right? We see predation, but it's generally an animal eating the plant. You don't necessarily see plants eating plants. But so protozoans exhibit some very animal-like kind of characteristics, and we'll talk a little bit about some examples of those in a little bit. Some other attributes of protozoans is that all of the cells are going to be eukaryotic. They all will have organelles such as mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum. Those specialized organelles inside the cell that have very important functions to the organism as a whole. Protozoans are unable to produce their own food. Again, they're not photosynthetic, so they don't use light from the sun in order to generate food for themselves. Instead, they'll ingest other organisms, such as algae, yeast, bacteria, and then some smaller protozoans in order to extract nutrients from these, from the prey that the protists are eating. Another key attribute of protozoans, which differs from the algae organisms that we talked about, is the fact that they do not have a cell wall. They have a very thick membrane called the pellicle, which algae have, but remember, algae have cell walls and a pellicle. But protozoans do not have a cell wall, but they do have a pellicle, which is the thickened cell membrane. And this just adds a structure and support as well as protection for the protozoan cell. The life cycle of a protozoan consists in two phases. You have the trophozoite phase and you have a cyst phase. In the trophozoite phase, what you would see is the protozoan organism being basically kind of like a free-floating organism, pretty motile and constantly eating. So it's basically in its prime, you know, because it's out and it's enjoying life, it's eating, it's feeding, it's interacting with other organisms. The cyst life stage of a protist is going to be kind of a survival stage. In which the protist is going to lay dormant for a while until it retains enough nutrients or has the right conditions in order for it to not have to undergo this dormant stage of self-preservation. In the cyst stage, the protozoan is very much non-motile, so it's very sessile. Now, there are some protozoans out there that are considered to be parasitic. Remember I did say one of the key attributes is the fact that they're free free living. But there are some, as you know, there's always exceptions to the rule, that are going to be parasitic. And so there are these parasitic organisms that can elicit diseases. And some key examples of that are going to be things like malaria, giardiasis, as well as trypanosomiasis. And all of those are acquired protists that a human could be infected with by ingesting a contaminated source or coming into contact with an insect vector. Malaria, as you may well know, is transmitted to humans via mosquitoes, but it's not the mosquito that causes malarial symptoms. It's the parasite or the protozoan that lives inside of the mosquito that gets transmitted in the mosquito saliva into the human when a blood meal is taken that can lead to the development of malaria. There's a lot of kind of organisms that kind of operate in this fashion, that uses a carrier or some sort of vector in order for infection to occur. Okay, so what that comes down to is that, yes, we have some protozoans that are parasites, and these particular protozoans are the ones that we pretty much really want to watch out for. So the way we classify protozoans is we kind of have grouped them together based on how they are able to move. Or another way to define that is it's based on their method of locomotion. So we have organisms that are referred to as amoebae. We have organisms referred to as ciliates. We have organisms referred to as flagellates, flagellates, and then sporozoas. With the amoebae, these are organisms that move using a structure known as a pseudopod or a pseudopodia, and a pseudopodia just translates to false feet. And an amoeba, if you don't know, is a cell that really has no uniform structure to it. So if you've ever seen an amoeba, it's just kind of like this irregular shape. And it has these arm-like extensions on it, which are called pseudopods, which are the false feet. And those false feet enable the amoeba to move from point A to point B. There are some dangerous amoeba that are out there. It's very rare for people to come into contact with them. But every summer or so, you always hear about a little kid or somebody who was swimming in a lake, and they come into contact with the brain-eating amoeba. Well, the scientific name from that is the Entamoeba histolytica, which can cause essentially the degradation of the human brain if you acquire this and it progresses to that particular level of infection. So this is also known as amoebic dysentery, which can make you incredibly sick if you're infected with it. And once you have a very small organism getting into your nervous system, that's kind of one of the more fatal of the medical conditions that can be derived from such an encounter. Okay, it's incredibly rare for things like that to happen, but it's important for us to know that they do happen. And I think a couple years ago there was a kid in Lake Wylie who actually, unfortunately, was infected with Entamoeba histolytica. So on that sad note, let's move on to the ciliates group. The ciliates group, they move based on what their name implies, which is a structure known as cilia, which we've talked about before. Cilia can help with attachment purposes, but in the organisms like Paramecium, which are called ciliates, they have these hair-like structures called cilia surrounding the cell. And that simply allows the organism to move to wherever it wants. There is a specific organism that's called Balantidium coli. And this organism can cause a condition called balantidiasis, which essentially is similar to that of amoebic dysentery, where you have a lot of gastrointestinal complications. This can be pretty much transmitted through drinking water that hasn't been sanitized and has been contaminated with these particular organisms. And then once the human takes them up, then obviously it leads to infection. The next group of protozoans have been classified as the flagellates, and these, obviously, as the name implies, they're going to have a flagella that helps propel them. Giardia lamblia is the cause of giardiasis, and giardias, if you don't know, is basically a diarrheal disease that many people can get from drinking contaminated water. So a lot of these protozoans we really don't have too much of a problem with here in the United States, but in countries where they don't have very good sanitation practices or sanitation system, you can see these pretty much thriving pretty rampantly in a lot of regions. So the next group is that of the sporozoas. These don't really have any kind of visual locomotive features, but there are some species that belong in this group that produce a type of life stage known as a sporozyte. And those sporozytes can be very dangerous as they go through the life cycle of the parasite. And Plasmodium, a subspecies, and Plasmodium, if you don't know, is one of the organisms that is kind of resides in the gut of a mosquito. And when the mosquito bites a patient, that's when it will transmit the Plasmodium parasite into the human host. And this is how malaria is developed. Eventually the Plasmodia will make its way to the liver cells of the human. And then in the liver cells, you have this formation of these sporozoites, which are going to cause infection for the patient, and that will develop malaria. So those are our 4 key groups that we have regarding our classification of protozoans: the amoebae, the ciliates, flagellates, and sporozoans. And this is typically constructed out of what type of methods are used for locomotion of the organisms. And here are some images that can kind of just show you what some of these guys look like. They're very interesting to look at underneath the microscope, but they can be very dangerous when infected with them. Here's a picture that B. coli that I was telling you about. This is the trophozoite. Remember, the protozoans have 2 stages, basically, the trophozoite, and then they have the cyst stage. So both these images are that of trophozoites. And in that stage, you can see that you've got little kind of cilia that are all around here on the side of the cell. You can't really see too much else on this. If you're actually looking at this in real time, you could see all of these cilia moving and probably see this little organism spinning underneath your microscope. This particular pictogram here is a scanning electron microscope image that was taken of Giardia lamblia. Again, this causes diarrhea in a lot of people who are infected with it. It's also kind of known as Giardia intestinalis, and you just get a lot of massive gastrointestinal complications, as well as the nasty diarrhea. This organism is also associated with traveler's diarrhea as well. Okay, so that's kind of those are just kind of the key things that I want to highlight with our protozoans group. So let's move on to the fungi group, which are a lot of fun to look at. The study of fungus is called mycology. The individuals who spend their life dedicated to studying fungi are known as mycologists. And you can pretty much find fungi anywhere in the world. They can reside in a lot of key regions. We don't know really too much about how to classify all the different types of fungi that are out there, but we do know that fungi have been able to provide us both with benefits as well as have negative impacts on us as we try to figure out how it is we're able to utilize fungi to the best of our ability. Some of the beneficial components are the fact that we can use them for food, we can use them for antibiotics,